Okay, so we have learned a bunch of stuff. We have learned that Kentucky Constitution actually includes a whole shitload of new rights and freedoms for every Kentuckian out there. At least a dozen more rights and freedoms than what the American Constitution gives us. We also learned Section 3 of Kentucky's Constitution gives us, we the people, the right to revoke any corporate charter that we don't like. We can amend it and alter it as we see fit. So if McDonald's or Walmart or Ford Motor Company or any company out there, KU, doesn't abide by what we want, then we could change their corporate charter or just dissolve it and just revoke their charter and say get the fuck out of Dodge. Stay in St. Louis, you know, Walmart. We don't need you fucking St. Louisians here. KU, go on back to Pennsylvania, or what's the 4th Street Live? That's Baltimore, Maryland. So we're making all these multinational corporations that do not exist inside Kentucky very rich. The distribution of powers of government, Section 27, the powers of government divided among legislative, executive, and judicial departments. The powers of the government of the Commonwealth of Kentucky shall be divided into 3 distinct departments, and each of them be confined to a separate body of magistracy, to wit, those who are legislative to one, those which are executive to another, and those which are judicial to another. No person or collection of persons being of one of those departments shall exercise any power properly belonging to either of the others, except in the instances hereinafter expressly directed or permitted. Section 28. The legislative department, Section 29. The legislative power shall be vested in a House of Representatives and a Senate, which together shall be styled the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Section 30. Term of officers of senators and representatives. Members of the House of Representatives and senators shall be elected at the general election in even numbered years, for terms of 4 years for senators and 2 years for members of the House of Representatives. So they should be elected at the general election even numbered years. So 2014, this is an even numbered year. So there's going to be an election for all the House of Representatives and the senators. I think it's senators for every 4 years. It could be just the House of Representatives this year. The term of office of representatives and senators shall begin upon the first day of January of the year succeeding their election. So January 1st is the first day. So I'm not sure if there's any new senators or House of Representatives or how or when that happens, but exciting stuff, right? Time of election and term of office of senators and representatives. This is Section 31. So we've talked about the first 26 sections being the Bill of Rights. Now we're talking about the distribution of the powers of government. Section 27, 28, 29, 30, and now I'm on 31. At the general election to be held in November 1984, and every 2 years thereafter, there shall be elected for 4 years one senator in each senatorial district, in which the term of predecessor in office will then expire. In every representative district, one representative for 2 years. So 1984, every 2 years thereafter, and 4 years after that. So 20 years, 2000, that's 2004, another 20, that's 2024. So 5, I don't know, I can't, I'm not for sure if the senators are up for re-election or not. The representatives definitely are. I don't know if senators are. Qualifications of senators and representatives. Section 32, no person shall be a representative who at the time of his election is not a citizen of Kentucky, has not attained the age of 24 years, who has not resided in the state 2 years next preceding his election, and the last year thereof in the county, town, or city of which he may be chosen. No person shall be a senator who at the time of his election is not a citizen of Kentucky, has not attained the age of 30 years, and has not resided in the state 6 years next preceding his election, and the last year thereof in the district for which he may be chosen. So, yeah, that's kind of boring stuff, but just to give you the idea and the gist of what the rest of the Constitution is going to be about. Some housekeeping things. So, the 1855 WASP was really, they carried over their fascist, capitalistic, totalitarian, bloodlust violence to 1975 with the anti-busing riots. So, we've just seen it since the 1855 know-nothing riots. It's just been downhill from there, right? a couple other points. The 1792 Constitution came from the Pennsylvania Constitution, so there's actual direct language in the 1891 Constitution of today that comes from the 1970 Pennsylvania Constitution, and there was a Bill of Rights in that Constitution. But then that came from a previous document, the 1776 document. The Pennsylvania Constitution had the 1776 Constitution and then the 1790. So the 1776 had some interesting things that they did without, but just to give you thinking about different ways of thinking about, you know, governing bodies. The 1776 in Pennsylvania, they had a council of censors. So the council of censors was actually like what we today have. The Supreme Court has judicial review, and so they could check the constitutionality of whether or not something is constitutional or not constitutional. But before, they had the council of censors, so they had an entire different group who was different from the judiciary that was determining whether things were constitutional or not. This makes me think about the branches of government. In some Latin American countries, it's not just legislative, executive, and judicial. They'll have an election branch, and I think election branch is actually an important thing. I mean, it's an important thing to think about, because an election branch makes sure that the election is run fairly and equally and smoothly, and that no person has any type of unnecessary bias. Anybody that is qualified to run for office should be allowed to run for office. Also, we should have more ballot initiatives and more issues to vote on, locally as well as statewide. But the council of censors makes me think about the election branch, and also it makes me think about a media branch. So if we was to have another constitutional convention, we wouldn't just want just the three branches that's put down on there, but we'd want to consider some of these other ones: election branch, a media branch. So that way, having a public media, we have a public media now, but in terms of actually getting access out there to the rural public and the rural poor, in quality programming, which you know, tells the public what they need to know. 75% of Kentucky don't even vote. 2 out of 5 of Kentucky adults can't even read. So these are like horrible statistics for the state of Kentucky, which aren't getting any better. So having a media branch, that would be completely governed by the Constitution. So everybody that would run for office would have equal media access time, and you would also get better programming that's more responsive to the public. The public would get to determine what they want and what they don't want. So the election and media branch is just something I've thought about. I think it'd be interesting. In order to pass down a felony, you have to have the Section 2 says that you, I heard someone says eavesdropping. Eavesdropping is a felony. Can this be true? So eavesdropping, I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. But Section 12, Kentucky's Constitution says that the indictment offense not to be prosecuted by information. So just information alone, a prosecutor can't just say, hey, I heard this piece of information, you're fucking guilty. They have to go through a grand jury. It's got to be presented by a grand jury first, except for these reasons. The only time it would not go in front of a grand jury would be because, except in cases arising in land or naval forces. So if there's land or navy forces, so military, navy, military. I don't even know naval forces. What naval forces does Kentucky have? I guess we might have some ships along the Ohio River and some in our creek beds and shit, but in terms of actually having a coastal ocean line, we don't have anything like that. So maybe naval or land forces, maybe something might happen with land forces or in the militia when in actual service in a time of war, public danger. So if there's a war going on, then you can, a prosecutor can, you know, indict somebody just out of nowhere. If there's a war, if there's public danger, they can indict somebody by information, which is how the Constitution words, you know, information, just prosecutor having the information to put forth instead of having the indictment of 12 of their peers of the grand jury, right? So the 12 peers should be already out there. They should be grand jury in a lot of fucking different cases. Any felony that's put up should be presented between the grand jurors. So there's a big pool in the beginning. You have 12 grand jurors for the entire year. They're the grand jury. They're the ones that say whether or not a fucking crime actually had happened. So that's in time of war, public danger, or by leave of court for oppression. Or by leave of court for oppression. So some reason if you had to leave court and you were being oppressed, or misdemeanor in office. So if you had a misdemeanor while you was in office, or by leave of court for oppression, they might try to indict you just with information. So that's a possibility. Indictable offenses not to be prosecuted by information. So Section 12, of Kentucky's Constitution, you know, specifically says we need grand juries for any type of indictments. So I'm not sure if eavesdropping is a felony or not. If it is, it's kind of crazy. I wanted to get into the history of Kentucky's Constitution because the history of Kentucky's Constitution shows a lot of similar problems in that we're going to have. It's going to be a hard time to get another constitutional convention ever in the state of Kentucky. So if we think the laws on the books are good enough now, because right now they're trying to cut away the treasurer, they cut away the railroad commission. 1975, they overhauled the entire judicial system. In 1990, they overhauled the entire education system. So how many times can we overhaul the entire system without touching the original document? So the original document about the judicial system is completely off kilter, and the original document about the education is completely off kilter. So now, you know, we've completely overhauled this entire fucking system using the current documents, and by just amending things, rewriting things, erasing things, and then putting things up online, and as if like that's really effective. I'm not for sure if it is. Now, for the 1792 Constitution Convention, it took 10 conventions to eventually get Kentucky's charter to be filled out. So that was the first state. I can understand why it took so many conventions. There was a Spanish conspiracy where they considered being, you know, declaring their allegiance to Spain. Or there's also an independence movement, just declare Kentucky its own nation, but they wanted to become America, so they went through Virginia's fucking guidelines and then kind of jumped through other hoops and then became the state in 1792. So that had happened. 24 of the 26 sections come from the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1790. The 26 sections came from there, except for Section 2, the absolute and arbitrary power clause, and then Section 25, which had to do with slavery, which they had added later on after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was shoved down Kentucky's throat. Poor slave-owning Kentucky's throat had to endure, you know, and that's actually the feelings and sentiments. It brings up the feelings and sentiments of 1891. Why were we building and constructing a new Constitution? Okay, why are we doing another one? And one of the reasons was because of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment made Kentucky's Constitution outdated, since they had provisions about allowing slaves, but the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment had outlawed slavery throughout all of America. And there was a big-ass war that went on, and then the troops stayed in Kentucky until 1877. And so that still was never codified into law. So that was one thing. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments was going on. But there's other things, too, that was happening. The first thing I also want to talk about, the house cleaning. W.E.B. Du Bois, he had asserted that the 1792 Constitution allowed free blacks to vote. And so that would have actually allowed free blacks to vote for 7 years in the beginning of Kentucky's history. But I've also heard people say that's not true, since they would have been citizens back in that year. Regardless, in the Constitution of 1799, there is provisions that was put in to specifically exclude black men from the right to vote, or black people from the right to vote. And so the fact that they specifically added it, it made it seem like as if there were black folks who were free and they were trying to assert their rights, and then they had to, you know, say, no, that's not allowed. That would be highly, I mean, in a slave state with a slave culture that had just codified slavery, I don't see free blacks being around very much longer. But apparently there was enough of a just cause for them to actually pin that in. Not only, you know, all free people are allowed to vote except for black people. So they had to add that part into the 1799 convention, or 1799 Constitution. So that was a regression. The 1799 was a regression. And then this 1850 Constitution will be it's sort of a regression too, because it still codifies slavery. In the very beginning, there was, I think it was a Presbyterian minister that tried to, I think it was David Rice, the Presbyterian minister. This is a good religion based factoid, okay, as Andrew, or as Alex Jones likes to say. So, see, I was talking about the 3 years in the 1850, and what the fuck was I going to look up? Damn it. 1799, it took 3 years for them to actually get to it, and then, oh man, I'm going to have to watch this over again just to find out. What was I going to look up, man, because this is actually pretty important. I was talking about how they took a lot of years, 3 years for a convention for 1799 to actually get up. They specifically added a section about the free blacks not being allowed to vote in 1799. Then in 1850, they had another Constitution convention that came up, and there was more things about slavery. Shit. Alright, I'll come back to that. So that actually kind of covers everything up. I'm going to come back and actually talk more about the history of the different constitutions, and I'm going to tie the American government into Kentucky's government. How do the two dance together? They're supposed to be equal powers, equal branches, but Lincoln had established that we're going to stay a union no matter what, and so that gave the federal government a lot more power, but they're not the only ones who have power. All the rest of the power that they do not have in the Constitution is given to us, the people, or the states. And of course the states are going to take every power that they could take.